Sorry about that. So welcome to the Human Society of Greater Phoenix. Let me turn this down. Better? No. I'll stand way back. Welcome to the Human Society of Greater Phoenix. We're proud to offer different positions and interesting insights. Sorry for my microphone. Again, just help yourself to the back to the pizza. If anything's left over, please just take it home because I can't eat it all. So I don't have any real big announcements. We're bringing this to you gratis, and we're glad to have Lucien here. So if you could feed the jar on your way out, it helps keeps the lights on, and let's.
Try harder.
It's never happened.
We promise this never happens.
We can't have more than one microphone on at any given time. There you go. Black magic. There we go. Live, this is why I get paid the big technical bucks. Anyway, so if you could feed the jar on the way out, it helps us resolve technical audio issues in real time. Anyway, so without further ado, I'm gonna bring up Andre to kind of introduce the person you've been waiting to see all day, all week, all month. Come on up, Andre.
He's our program director, sorry.
I almost say good morning, because that's usually what I say when I walk up here.
Habit.
It's Sunday morning, so for those of you who don't come to HSGP regularly, and by the way, who's new in the room? Who's here for the first time? Holy cow! Wow! Well, welcome. We hope to see you again. We do speaker meetings like this every other Sunday, so check us out on Meetup, find us on Facebook, get all the details. We like to keep some interesting topics in-house and hope to foster discussion, tolerance, and all those good things. So, good evening. I'm excited to see that it's actually so full because it is a Monday night, so thank you all for coming. I'm not going to spend too much time up here because I want to get right to the speaker and make sure he has all the time he needs to get through his fantastic presentation. So, Lucien Greaves, spokesperson for and co-founder of the Satanic Temple, will be discussing how the Satanic Temple campaigns against theocracy in the United States. As well-financed and organized theocrats fight to establish a new Dark Ages, the Satanic Temple is on the front lines, fighting to defend Enlightenment values. Lucien Greaves explains non-theistic Satanism, the Satanic Temple's present campaigns, and the organization's vision for the future. Advocating for acceptance of non-theistic religious exemption and privilege, TST has proven to be one of the nation's most effective counterbalances against theocratic encroachment. The organization is best known for its ongoing efforts to place a satanic monument next to a Ten Commandments monument on public grounds, and its ongoing legal efforts to oppose reproductive rights restrictions nationwide, including federal and state lawsuits in Missouri against the state's mandatory 72-hour abortion waiting period. Greaves is an internationally recognized activist who has appeared in numerous high-profile media outlets, including MSNBC, NPR, Huffington Post Live, CNN, Harper's Monthly, Newsweek, Fox News, Vice, Salon, Rolling Stone, and many more. He's lectured nationwide and has been a featured speaker for national conferences held by American Atheists, Atheist Alliance, the Secular Student Alliance, and more. So without any further delay, Lucien Greaves.
Thank you. I'm very impressed with myself. So,
That's all.
okay. I'm a little feedbacky.
You're going to have it.
Probably.
We should have prayed over the audio equipment.
Can everybody still hear me?
Probably.
In the back, everybody? Okay, good. So anyways, we had a ritual type performance event a couple nights ago, and I've been in town since the beginning of the weekend. I'm here with the Arizona chapter. Identify yourselves. So we've been having fun and doing some hard living. So I don't generally write down everything I'm going to say in a lecture. I kind of map it out in my slides and let it go its course. And I still have this underlying fear. Every time I do this, I just might forget everything. There's a higher likelihood of that happening this time. So don't be alarmed. There's a lot of places we could start, though, with any of this because this speaks to so much that's happening in the world. But a good place as any for us to begin is by looking at the text of the First Amendment, which says that Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion, or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of the people to peaceably assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances. So the 5 liberties conferred upon us by the First Amendment are religion, speech, press, assembly, and petition. This is a real cornerstone of American democracy. If you need the citation for this again, it's the Constitution, the very First Amendment. Now, by comparison, let's take a look at the Ten Commandments. The Ten Commandments are often cited when people say that they feel they have a place in the public forum, or that they should have some kind of role in American life and legislation. And when you try arguing against them, people often point out that you are against stealing or you are against prohibitions on stealing and murder. So as though those are the only things stated in the Ten Commandments. But you look at the rest of them, and they very obviously run contrary to the spirit and the letter of the First Amendment. Thou shalt have no other gods before me is a prohibition on the free exercise of religion. Thou shalt not take the Lord's name in vain is a prohibition on free speech. And by extension, these theocratic fiats of dark ages threaten all the rest of the liberties elaborated in the First Amendment, and the two cannot coexist. Now let's look at the 7 tenets of the Satanic Temple. One should strive to act with compassion and empathy towards all creatures in accordance with reason. The struggle for justice is an ongoing and necessary pursuit that should prevail over laws and institutions. One's body is inviolable, subject to one's own will alone. And we point to that tenet in particular when we're arguing for bodily autonomy, reproductive rights, and against corporal punishment in schools. The freedom of others should be respected, including the freedom to offend, to willfully and unjustly encroach upon the freedoms of another is forego your own. Belief should conform to our best scientific understanding of the world. We should take care to never distort scientific facts to fit our beliefs. And people are fallible. If we make a mistake, we should do our best to rectify it and resolve any harm that may have been caused. Every tenet is a guiding principle designed to inspire nobility in action and thought. The spirit of compassion, wisdom, and justice should always prevail over the written or spoken word. These tenets coexist with the First Amendment, and if there's one thing the Satanic Temple is not, it's theocratic. We realize that Satanism isn't for everybody, nor should it be. The Ten Commandments, in contrast, are a carryover from a theocratic, monarchical, feudalistic, repressive monotheism that tries to dictate to people the one true way to salvation, the one way to live their lives, and very clear moral legislation. It runs contrary to pluralism, free inquiry, and diversity of thought, and it has no place amongst liberal democratic values. These are dark age fiats of subjugation. The First Amendment, by contrast, and there wasn't really a good image, so I just put a picture of my cat. The First Amendment, in contrast, embodies Enlightenment values, and they were the product of deist authors who believed that if there was a God, the God was a clockmaker God, a God that started the universe in motion, but didn't have any part in our daily lives, not a personal God you could talk to, just a beginning consciousness perhaps preceding the Big Bang. There's a difference between deism and pantheism, and the pantheists were more to believe that nature itself is the embodiment of God, that the universe could act as a type of neural network that would be this consciousness we would call God. The Theocrats at the time, in the revolutionary time, called them atheists. And it's hard to believe the deist authors today would speak in such religious terminology as they did if they knew it would come to where we're at now. Now, the 7 tenets of the Satanic Temple, you might hear those and think, what do they have to do with Satanism? But they reflect a new kind of post-Enlightenment reality in the metaphor embodied by the Satanic narrative. From Milton to Anatole France, literary Satanists constructed this narrative of Satan as the rebel against these kind of monarchical, theocratic values. And we believe in the power of metaphor and the power of art to inform and motivate, and to define one's essential character, what we are and who we strive to be, and our cultural identity. We don't choose Satan. People often ask us if we're non-theistic, why would we choose something as contentious as Satan to be our icon? But Satan is a pre-existing icon for the affirmative values that we hold that place us at odds with the Dark Age Theocrats. And the more oppressive the Abrahamic religions become, the more heroic Satan becomes, to the point that the Satanic Temple is becoming widely accepted in more reasoned society as is fighting a heroic fight. Now, this kind of being at odds with American values is more or less understood in some areas of the theocratic war as they try to redefine American values to align with their principles. They realize that they don't now. And here we have this declaration of dependence upon God in this Holy Bible that's available online. It was signed by several megachurch pastors, but more importantly to us, it was signed by the senator who sponsored the Ten Commandments monument that we're going to be pressing a lawsuit against in Arkansas right now. And their declaration of dependence upon God says, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Since our Creator gave us these rights, we declare that no government has the right to take them away." So far, okay. Among these rights is the right to exercise our Christian beliefs as put forth in God's Holy Bible. We therefore declare that God grants life at conception, and no one has the right to take that life unless it is a direct threat to the life of the mother. Marriage was instituted by God between one man and one woman, and the Lord gave only the family unit the responsibility to have children and raise them in the fear of the Lord. We therefore respectfully reserve the right to refuse any mandate by the government that forces us to fund or support abortion. We also oppose same-sex marriage, polygamy, bestiality, so on and so forth, and declarations to Jesus and all the rest. But that is more or less an open declaration of anti-Americanism that seems to realize that their theocratic impulses and liberal democracy aren't one and the same and can't coexist. Now, the Ten Commandments fight that we were fighting started in Oklahoma in 2012. And in 2012, a sponsor, a Baptist, who was also a Baptist preacher and a member of the legislature in Oklahoma, put forward a Ten Commandments monument bill that made two claims to try to undermine a Establishment Clause claim. They were saying that this was not a violation of separation between church and state, because for one thing, the Ten Commandments monument that they were going to put up was donated by a private entity. Never mind that the private entity was also put together by the pastor in the legislature who passed the bill. It is still a private entity, but that it was also a secular document that was just honoring the codification of American law, particularly, I guess, constitutional law. And as you can see, when you put the Ten Commandments up alongside the First Amendment, that simply isn't true. And there's no overlap between the two, and no credible excuse for the Ten Commandments to act to honor our American jurisprudence. So we offered to put a monument on the same grounds, because what they had done by making this claim that a private entity could place a monument on the Capitol grounds, was created a limited public forum in which other monuments could apply on the same terms, and it wasn't up to the government there to engage in viewpoint discrimination and say that one monument of religious significance was better than the other. And we tried to match their arguments. We put in our bid to put up a monument before we had a monument design, but we wanted our design to send the appropriate message too. And when you see it the first time, I don't know what it says to you, or if you think it sends the right message. But we thought, first and foremost, having a monument alongside the Ten Commandments monument on the public grounds would send the affirmative message that we do still respect pluralism, and affirming that we do respect the First Amendment and that the government cannot engage in viewpoint discrimination, that we would hold them to that. We were also very clear that our monument was only being submitted to go there because the Ten Commandments were there. And if the Ten Commandments weren't there, we wouldn't want our monument there. And in fact, if the Ten Commandments were to be subject of separate litigation while our monument was up and the Ten Commandments came down, we would take our monument away too. Because this monument doesn't send its full message until it is put alongside the Ten Commandments monument. The Ten Commandments monument is part of the artistic backdrop of this very monument. But we wanted something that would express this kind of symbolically as well. So we use this image of Baphomet, the sabbatic goat, to signify this reconciliation of opposites. We might have opposing religious viewpoints. We might have what appear to be diametrically opposed viewpoints, but we still can coexist on the public grounds if they're going to open the public grounds for that. So these kind of binary elements speak to that. It's part animal, part human, points up and points down. We have the male and female child on either side. You have the inverted pentagram above, and then you have the right side up one on the head, and you have the caduceus signifying reconciliation and negotiation in the middle. And further, we said, to speak to this issue of the codification of U.S. jurisprudence, that we wanted this to stand in honor of those who were unjustly accused and maligned during the various witch hunts throughout time. Not to celebrate that that had happened, but in order to show what it was that led to the secular jurisprudence that we enjoy today. Innocence until proven guilty, and no anti-blasphemy laws. It's a very First Amendment, it turns out. And we felt that given that we weren't trying to ignore the very content of a certain text on our monument, we had a stronger argument than Oklahoma had for their Ten Commandments monument. This was altogether too much, of course, for a lot of people. And you can see that a lot of the politicians themselves didn't understand the issue, and they didn't understand that they couldn't give exclusive rights to one religious viewpoint over another. And I thought one of the best illustrations of this was a little discussion I had on Huffington Post Live with a member of the legislature in Oklahoma, where this bizarre exchange happened.
We do things like that all the time in the legislature. We pass laws, and most of our laws have some kind of moral impact because that's what we do as lawmakers, and that's what we believe. That we don't believe that people should be stealing from people. And
to give it context, he's arguing for the Ten Commandments. Obviously, he's arguing for the role the Ten Commandments play in American life and in jurisprudence. And of course, he brings up theft and murder again, even though those aren't constitutional but common law.
So we enforce those kinds of laws, and that's what we do as lawmakers.
But as a representative in Oklahoma, you represent Oklahoman Hindus, Jews, Buddhists, Muslims, as well as Christians, and even Satanists, insofar as you should maintain an environment in which each of these groups are treated with equal respect in the eyes of the law. If you don't understand that basic premise of holding public office, you have no business doing so.
Well, that's your opinion. I have my own. I think
And I thought that said so much about the Oklahoma government that he thought it was a matter of opinion that the government shouldn't engage in viewpoint discrimination, that there should be equality for religious voices. He felt that that was just a matter of opinion, and if you pay attention to current events, it seems that it kind of is. I have to give him that. But that's a battle being fought right now. But anyways, ultimately, the Ten Commandments monument was taken down in Oklahoma. The ACLU had been pressing suit against the Ten Commandments monument being there, and then suddenly we heard one day that the Supreme Court had ruled against the Ten Commandments monument. We were all geared up to sue them because they hadn't replied to our request. They were obviously ignoring us. They had no intention of allowing us to put our monument up. But they kind of fixed that situation by taking the Ten Commandments down, which upset a lot of people. And the subtlety from this image convinced people that the satanic agenda and the homosexual agenda are indeed one. Subliminal messaging. Now, the ways in which people couldn't wrap their heads around this notion that another religious voice, especially one that caused so much concern, is the Satanic Temple would have a place doing this at all, a place, the audacity to ask for representation, equal access in a public forum, was very apparent in everything we did. And even when we unveiled our monument, it was finally completed, and we were ready to go with it, and we wanted to, of course, sue Oklahoma and then put it up there. We were doing our unveiling of the monument at private venues. We were applying to do this, and we got shut out of 7 of them in Detroit before we found one warehouse that just didn't care so long as we paid them, and we did. We ended up cleaning out the warehouse as well. But it was a private event, and the city was up in arms that we could do that. And we received a good number of death threats and threats of violence. People said they were going to burn the place down, that they were going to bomb it. When we did this event, because we had a ticketed event where we were playing music, we had this whole silly thing going on. If you're interested in that kind of party, I would hook up with the Arizona chapter afterwards. These things happen quite a bit. But what we did to try to keep some of the religious zealots out, because we were getting so many threats, was we did it old school, rave style, and we emailed people the day of the event to tell them where to go for the event, which turned out to be a decoy location, where they underwent their first security check, and then had to sign their souls away to Satan before they learned where the real event was. And it more or less worked. The protesters stayed out at the wrong location in the rain. And there's a good 45-minute documentary about all of this that aired on CNN around the Christmas before last, that talks about this entire unveiling event and how the planning went and how hysterical the protesters had gotten. And probably the most interesting part was when Lisa Ling talked to a couple of guys who were driving around with the statue of St. Michael outside of the venue. And people thought we had hired them, and everybody came out and cheered every time they passed by. But here was her asking them their thoughts on religious liberty.
We're protesting today because we don't believe that the Baphomet symbolism is the right symbolism for the city of Detroit. Also, we disagree with the political agenda of the Satanic Temple. They're anti-church dominance, which means they're anti-us.
This place will never be known as the house of Satan. Our legacy will never be that the devil erected his temple here.
There's a battle going on right now for the soul of Detroit. All values can't fit on the table. What will Detroit become? We're trying to figure that out right now.
Do you think there is room in the city for everyone to be able to practice what they believe?
If you want to do it in your basement, that's fine, but parading it in public and trying to bring legitimacy to symbolism, that is not positive. Go-headed statue associated with Satanism and the devil is not the right kind of symbolism for the city of Detroit.
This country has always had profound people of faith who brought their faith values into the public square. How can a Satanist tell me I gotta be neutral? We must make a stand today to say our faith belongs in public. Somebody say our faith belongs in public.
The Satanic Temple says they'll gladly go away if the government adheres to the separation of church and state and stops taking cues from the church. What do you think about that?
I'm going to fight to make sure that the Satanic Temple's understanding of the separation of church and state and their political agenda does not gain legitimacy and authority. I don't think the world they want to shape is the world we should be living in.
The protesters here see the rain as a sign from God, while new arrivals to the scene have brought along a symbolic weapon of their own, a statue of the Archangel Michael. Peter and Rodney are both Catholics who are unhappy with Satan's presence here.
we're kind of offsetting a satanic vibe going on here today with our statue of Saint Michael, the angel who's primarily tasked with fighting Satan.
What's wrong with these people gathering to unveil their monument?
The very nature of their worship is a mockery to the true worship of God in the church. And I do take offense to that.
Yeah, these people, from what I understand, are mostly just agnostic. They're not actual devil worshippers, but Satan is real and messing around with stuff they shouldn't.
Do you believe in the freedom of religion?
Yes.
So to that extent, do you not believe that they should be able to practice their religion?
I don't believe that people are free for error. People are free for the truth, but never for something that's wrong.
If they espouse any other belief other than Satan, would you be okay with them?
No, I'm not okay with any other religion except Catholicism, because that's the only true religion.
So there you go. That was the viewpoint. Those guys were from a website called Church Militant, which is growing in popularity and pretty much tells you what they're all about. But he said that Catholicism was the only true religion, and so therefore they're the only ones who have any freedom of religion at all. And that seems to be the thought of people in political office, especially at local levels or state levels. And Mary Phelan, the governor of Oklahoma, demonstrating her sheer ignorance of what had entirely transpired. She tweeted that she wanted the people of Oklahoma to vote on whether the Ten Commandments monument was to come back. And they even went so far, within the last year, they passed another bill. And this time it was called the Historical Documents Bill. And the Historical Documents Bill stated that historical documents that inform people of some type of monumental event in American history could be glorified on the Capitol grounds, but it needed to be within certain limited parameters of what those texts could be. And they suggested the Magna Carta, the Declaration of Independence, Bill of Rights, and of course the Ten Commandments. And this was just another attempt at putting the Ten Commandments monument up. This would have never held, of course, because it didn't address any of the problems that were already addressed in litigation with the ACLU when the Ten Commandments monument came down to begin with. But when you have a stupid fucker like Scott Pruitt as the Attorney General, who is now the head of the EPA in the Trump administration, you couldn't be certain that this wouldn't go all the way through. And we were considering what we could possibly do if they were to put up the Ten Commandments monument as now a historical monument, a historical documents bill, because we had previously refused to engrave our tenets on the monument to begin with, because we don't believe that these kind of things should be etched in stone, and you should always keep an open mind and follow the evidence. But just the same, they had limited it to documents, and we were wondering if there was anything we could point to that would have as much effect as something like the Magna Carta or the Bill of Rights. Ultimately, we decided that if this was to happen, we would just engrave the Magna Carta on the back of the Baphomet monument, and we would call the front the back, and the back the front, and we would say nothing more about the design standards, because it would have fit within the parameters. Said it was just flourish or whatever. Yeah, that was kind of that would have been Magna Carta. It was a little disappointing that didn't happen when that was the plan, because I thought that would have been funny. This helped really generate a lot of opinion, and some of the best press reactions we had gotten. Of course, Glenn Beck crying is always fun.
Okay, so now you're happy because you have the Ten Commandments taken down, but are you still pushing to have the goat with the horns and so on put up on the state capitol grounds?
No, we don't want our monument there without the Ten Commandments there. The point all along was that it would complement and contrast the Ten Commandments and reaffirm that we live in a pluralistic nation that respects diversity and religious liberty.
First of all, we say that being a homosexual is a constitutional right. Before that, we said that slaughtering unborn babies was a constitutional right. And now we want to unveil a statue of Satan in the midst of that economically plagued city. Can you believe that? Where are we headed?
Should they should be able to put the statue up, and then they should be shot right next to it, and then we take it down.
Evil will not destroy us. It will pervert us.
Isn't this what is going to bring the judgment of God upon us?
But the thing with the horns and so on, the Ten Commandments goes up because not only does it have some religious meaning, but it has historical meaning too. I mean, would you acknowledge that about the Ten Commandments?
Well, I would, well, yes, if you would acknowledge that Baphomet has historical meaning as well.
The Baphomet is the goat with
The image at least goes back to the 19th century. It's at least as old as Mormonism in the case.
In the end, we will beg the Lord above to destroy us. We will beg for destruction.
So you say, well, could we possibly be serving idols? Could we be sacrificing our babies to some heathen god? Is there something that we're going to be having ritual sacrifice on the state house wall of some state?
Are we making a mockery of everything with regard to Christianity in this society? Now we're going to have a satanic monument next to the Ten Commandments, really?
I mean, the U.S. Supreme Court has already ruled that the Ten Commandments, that the displays not only have a religious significance, but also a historical one.
Well, you're talking a different type of issue because in Oklahoma, they were ruling by the state constitution, not the federal constitution.
I know,
so
but
it's a different issue. If you're talking Texas, it's a moot point.
It's not that different, but you're right, Texas...
We're talking different constitutions.
I've looked at the both.
State constitution versus federal constitution.
I know, I looked at them both. And then I practiced law for like a decade too, so I did read them and see a lot of similar words. Lucien, thank you. Good luck to you.
And I taught you that there was a separation between that there was a difference between the federal constitution and the state constitution.
Thank you for that. All right, good to see you.
Let the media of the world mock me.
Are we going to be allowing this to happen? And while we're doing it, we'll be having polygamy and polyamory and all the other things that go along with a corrupt culture. Is that the way we're heading? Well, it looks like it is.
There is a statue to Lucifer that has been erected.
This country was not based on Satan. Now, you may be mistaken on that. I mean, you may have your own belief about how this country was based on. It does. Listen, they can have it.
Time magazine says it's really not that big of a deal. Let me tell you, it is a big deal. God will not be mocked on his own land by his own people who are covenant people. And at the same time, on Monday, they remove his words in Oklahoma in the middle of the night.
So this battle for the monuments and the symbols on public ground, this isn't an arbitrary thing. This has very real world ramifications. They're trying to declare, when they put these Ten Commandments monuments up, that this is a Christian nation and that we should be giving deference to the Ten Commandments. And they are explicitly fighting for religious privilege for one viewpoint. And they're trying that very hard. And this is very much well worth the fight because this extends into everything we do. It's with that notion that they fight to restrict abortion rights. It's with that notion that they fight to diminish the rights of everybody who doesn't pledge fealty to this religious viewpoint. And we saw this public misunderstanding of what pluralism means and what religious freedom means very clearly here in Phoenix when our chapter asked to do the invocation before a city council meeting. Was everybody here aware of that? It seemed like this entire place was entire meltdown mode over the very idea. And this fucking dickhead, Sal DeCiccio, went on a very slanderous campaign against us through the entire thing. And here was a Twitter post of his where he was complaining that politically correct Phoenix politicians are pushing satanic prayer and about to get pushed back. And this is a city council member who apparently didn't understand that the invocation being given prior to the city council was not meant to be an endorsement of a particular viewpoint by the city itself. And when you have a city official who doesn't understand that, it just does really give the lie to the claim that there isn't any negative ramifications towards having these invocations at all. A lot of alternative religious voices don't want to jump into the kind of controversy that we really live for in doing these kinds of things. And they're content to sit on the sidelines and not be maligned by their entire community because they feel more apologetic to that community, I guess, than we do. But this was the first thing that our chapter heads for the Arizona chapter did, and it was a real thankless task and an initiation by fire, really. Both Michelle Short and Stu had been in contact with me separately, and then I put them together to see if they could work together on kind of cohering a chapter, and it worked out very well. They deserve a round of applause for all the They took a lot of shit and they got a lot of threats, and they had to cover a lot of press when they weren't used to doing that kind of thing and on a very controversial topic. And it was very difficult to watch the public hearing preceding the city council meeting where they were supposed to give the invocation, because it was open to public comment. And during those public comments, we had a good window into misunderstandings of what it means to allow an invocation at the city council, and how people do not understand the First Amendment, and they do not understand the value of government viewpoint neutrality, and they very much feel that a group being allowed to give an invocation is an endorsement of that organization's point of view. And I think if anything, the comments, and I put together some of them here, really illustrate the problem with allowing religion into the public forum at all.
There is a constitution greater than the American Constitution, and it is substantiated or sustained by God himself.
I'm going to read the First Amendment. Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Satanism is not a religion. It's a cult.
I think their goal is to silence prayer as opposed to doing invocations.
Their goal is to silence any kind of prayer whatsoever.
We take a pledge of allegiance that's one nation under God. That's not out there by mistake.
How many people actually have a dollar bill or a piece of money in their wallet or their pocket? I do believe it says, "In God we trust." And I've got people that are ready to demonstrate if you don't stand up for God.
And right now, our domestic enemies seem to be pretty great.
They are a hate group, and specifically, they are a misogynist group. You will see images of Michelle Short in bondage, in nudity, in all kinds of positions that are not appropriate. A hate group.
Let me comment. I want you to know why she's saying this. She's saying this because Michelle does modeling, and sometimes her clothes hasn't been on while she's modeled. This, of course, means that we're a terrorist organization.
Who promotes violence against women. Their main goal is to silence any expression, any religious expression in public life.
I do agree with you that it is a cult. It's not a real religion. It just isn't. Their main goal, and I want to drive this home, is to silence the other side.
It could considered to be by a woman like me to be terrorism.
We can't allow the members of the city council and mayor to pick and choose who they want to give the invocation and only invite those people. It has to be open.
And this country was founded on the principles of Judeo-Christian principles. We are not going to practice our religion behind our closed doors and behind the churches. We're going to practice it right here at City Council.
Don't sell your soul on this.
Our nation was founded on Judeo-Christian values
and prayers. If we abandon him, he will abandon us.
You will answer to God and represent Jesus Christ.
And when I hear all these people talking and they say, under God, well, which God are you talking about? I heard that gentleman just say, Jesus Christ. So if you're a Jew, is it not your God? Or is it a Muslim? Or are we just going with the religions of Abraham? Either you have everybody or you have nobody.
It saddens me to hear what's going on. I'm a Christian. I believe in the one true God. I want Christians to pray. I want those that believe in God, the one true God, to pray, and it will bring blessings to everyone.
We're one nation under God, believe it or not, like it or not.
I believe a Satan worshiper would just bring curses.
I recommend the elimination of the invocation from the agenda.
The motto for our nation is, in God we trust.
You seem to think that this prayer thing is all about you guys. But you work for us. You represent us. You aren't individuals who can say, this prayer is good, that prayer is bad.
But I myself served in a country called Iraq. It's none of my business how you vote, if you don't want to tell me, and how you pray, because I don't need a middleman between me and my God. I don't need a high priest.
Christianity is becoming irrelevant, and being politically correct is becoming relevant.
We want to lift up the name of Jesus. There is no other name in heaven and earth whereby a man must be saved than the name of Jesus Christ. Let's get that straight. Make no mistake about it. Jesus is the way.
I'm a proud atheist, and I am here to ask you, as government officials, to honor the minority in this community.
This is a spiritual thing. This is in the spiritual realm. This is evil against good. And the devil is out, Satan is out to win. And we don't want to give him Phoenix.
Many years ago, or more than 200 years ago, our government had a good idea in the First Amendment to keep separate religion and government. Also in Article 6, Paragraph 3, they said that elected representatives are bound by an oath to the Constitution, not to the Bible.
Now, because I don't bow to an Abrahamic God, does that make me subject to a tweet that says that I'm too stupid to be represented by this council? I'm done.
Matthew 6:6 specifically states that when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. What we need to be doing is trying to put inclusion into government.
I have personal knowledge of what Satanists do. Now, this was a long time ago.
I know the city of Phoenix is making a bad decision by inviting Satanists for a prayer.
As for the Satanist prayer coming the 18th, I don't believe that the city has a choice but to allow it to happen.
It is the goal of Satan to silence and muzzle people's voices. Our goal is not to shut down the Satanists, but it's our goal to shut down their agenda, which is to bring death and destruction over Phoenix.
I'm with those that hold that everyone here is entitled to believe whatever they choose to believe. What they're not entitled to do is to impose each of their beliefs on all the rest of us. I challenge anyone here to open their Bible and find the word democracy or republic in it. It isn't there. We do not live in a Judeo-Christian culture.
So are we invoking still the blessings of God on our state and our city? Are we invoking the curses of the deity spoken of that they serve as Satan?
When I took my oath of citizenship, it was under God.
I am a child of God. I am a child of God.
I would not let El Chapo play marbles with my children. Or Jack el Destripador. Or Jack the Dios bendiga. God bless.
The government has no business in establishing a religion, but they have no business in regulating it either.
I want you to know that there are things worse than lawsuits for you to consider. Can't imagine having a Satanist church come here and invoke the powers of darkness over the city of Phoenix, when most of us pray every day to keep him away from us and keep him out of our lives.
A member of this committee asks that anyone who approves of the upcoming invocation of the Satanic Temple should put their name in the record. I, Jocelyn Nicole Nickel, proudly stand with Thomas Jefferson and sign my name to protecting and defending the Constitution of the United States of America.
Thank you to Scott and Kara Pryor for being there as well. Thank you very much. But
that was 3 hours of hell.
I watched it streaming and I was traumatized for days thereafter. It took me a while to regain my sense of humor about any of it. But I think we see when they're holding up a dollar bill and saying that it says in God we trust and therefore they have exclusive license, that it shows the folly of having in God we trust on money. It shows us the practical backlash in having under God in the Pledge of Allegiance and why we shouldn't have it there. Obviously, this is just but one step, and we see, as I said, that narrative being constructed to the point where we see moral legislation and restrictions upon reproductive rights. And recently, we found out that our case is going to the Supreme Court in Missouri, where we're fighting against abortion restrictions in Missouri, and we're fighting on religious liberty grounds. We are saying that we don't believe with the notion that life begins at conception, or that conception you have a individual and unique human life, and therefore restrictions that are built around that concept shouldn't be imposed upon us. And when Trump got elected, we saw the anti-abortion Theocrats become very emboldened very, very quickly. And we saw them trying to pass laws that were very disturbing to people who care about issues like reproductive rights and bodily autonomy. And we saw that in I believe it was Ohio, they passed a heartbeat bill where they were saying an abortion wouldn't be performed at any time when a heartbeat could be detected. And I believe that's around 3 weeks even, and can be before a woman realizes that she's pregnant at all. And we were clear that the heartbeat didn't really mean anything to us, and that we define personhood by higher cognitive functions, that you need to be able to have actual perception, not just sensation, before you can be considered to be human. By the time you're non-viable, perhaps, then that claim comes into play. But until then, you're a part of the woman's body. And we hold that up as a religious belief based upon our tenets. One, that the body is inviolable, subject to one's own will alone, and that we should follow the best scientific evidence. And if you think that's altogether too tenuous a link to our tenets, I would ask you just to look at the Hobby Lobby ruling and ask what kind of scriptural justification you could have for the idea that a corporation does not have to pay health care benefits to a health care plan that provides contraceptives. But more interestingly about Hobby Lobby was that they were claiming that the contraceptives themselves were pharmaceuticals that induced abortion, when in fact they prevented fertilization. They did not, in fact, cause abortions, but that didn't matter because they held to the belief that they did. And they decided to believe that these pharmaceutical contraceptives were abortifacients, and so the whole issue was deliberated on as though that were true. So their religious belief trumped science. In Texas, they were trying to push a fetal burial rule, and they were saying that if a woman was going to have an abortion, she was going to have to pay for a proper burial of the aborted fetus, and that's very much a religious standard. But the quote put out in the press release then said that Texas health officials are baldly imposing the view that the fetal tissue is elevated to personhood. This was the quote I put for myself in the press release where we said we'd fight this and offer an exemption. A religious opinion that conflicts with our own. If Texas is going to treat the disposal of fetal tissue differently from the disposal of any other biological material in contradiction to our own religious beliefs, they need to present a compelling state interest for doing so. Of course, there is no such state interest, and it's perfectly clear the demand for fetal tissue burial is a punitive measure imposed by sadistic theocrats. It's clear these officials deem harassment an acceptable form of pushing their misguided religious agendas. Neither of those laws passed. But in Missouri, they have this restriction that has a 72-hour waiting period on abortions. A woman first has to go into the clinic, and at the time we filed the lawsuits, they only had one clinic that performed abortions. So a woman would have to go into the clinic, she would have to receive these state-mandated informed consent materials, and then wait 72 hours before she could have the procedure done. So with one clinic, she could travel maybe 5 to 6 hours, have to find daycare for her children if she had other children, and it turns out some 59% of women who get abortions already have children, which I think already would blow the mind of some of the people who feel that it's just a convenient form of after-the-fact birth control. But the idea of the 72-hour waiting period, this 3 days, and they might have to find lodging, whatever else, it makes it prohibitive for people to receive the procedure in case. Anyways, it's to give the woman time to consider this state-mandated sentence that the life of each human being begins at conception. Abortion will terminate the life of a separate, unique, living human being. Well, we say that those are debatable points. Nothing magical happens at conception that you could deem the beginning of life. This is living biological material. It's not dead and then becomes animated. There does begin to be a change, and now they're trying to say that unique DNA constitutes a separate, unique, living human being, and that begs questions about things like ectopic pregnancies, what are also called tubal pregnancies, ones that have no hope of developing into a human life but need to be removed to save the woman's life, or the fact that a tumor has its own distinct genetic code, its own DNA, or the fact that at any point this can split and become twins, triplets, so it's really a genetic blueprint. It really doesn't define an individual and unique human being, and we feel that unless you can elevate these things to scientific absolutes, our religious claim stands, and you need to take our claim seriously that this violates our own religious point of view, that this isn't the case, and to oppose your religious view is very much a violation of free exercise rights. In the lower court, bumped us up to the Missouri Supreme Court, and they wrote an opinion in doing so that we have a legitimate and substantial constitutional grievance, which is very, very encouraging. And we have a date on our Supreme Court case now of January 23rd. So this really, stands to be a real momentous fight in the culture war and can really help redefine how these battles are fought hereafter. In the case of Belle Plaine, kind of a rough segue there, but we find ourselves going into open forums all the time and trying to fight these battles for pluralism, to show people that the public forum doesn't exist for them alone. And a very obvious place for us to do this was a place in Belle Plaine, Minnesota, where they had a Christian memorial in a veterans park, a place designated as a veterans park. And in that veterans park, they had a Christian memorial. It was a depiction of a soldier kneeling at a cross. A local from Belle Plaine complained to the Freedom from Religion Foundation. The Freedom from Religion Foundation reached out to the government there and told them that this was a violation of the Establishment Clause, so they took the cross away. And then some clever fools from the Alliance Defending Freedom, or Alliance Defense Fund, I always forget, they changed their name once, so it goes back and forth. They came up with a clever idea that it could also be a private donation, the cross. They could open it up as a limited public forum, and that they could set certain parameters on veterans memorials, and anybody could submit one, and therefore the Christian memorial could come back, into play. And so there was a great deal of hypocrisy all the way through this, and it was a hypocrisy, to maybe retroactively help the segue there, that we saw in an amicus brief in the Missouri case, Missouri Right to Life and the Thomas More Society, both very religious, freedom of religion, so-called organizations, submitted an amicus brief against our case in the Missouri Supreme Court, actually claiming that theirs was an absolute scientific point of view, that life begins at conception is scientifically uncontroversial because of this notion that it creates unique DNA. Setting all those other questions aside, but if you contemplate the hypocrisy of this and all of a sudden them turning around and claiming that science needs to trump any irrational religious claim, after the Thomas More Society, of course, had submitted an amicus brief on behalf of Hobby Lobby, I think you see just how ludicrous this all starts to be. And you could also see how ludicrous it is in the hypocritical from the Phoenix invocation case. You had people saying that they needed to censor us from speaking lest religious voices be censored, because they feel that not having exclusive privilege in the forum is tantamount to censorship of their point of view. So everything they do to us, they attribute it to their own persecution somehow. In any case, with the Belle Plaine thing, the hypocrisy got far more hilarious because a representative from the Minnesota Archdiocese started complaining that the monument in Satanism in their city would be harmful towards children. And this is Catholic priest. And the Gospel Herald reported, said the Satanic Temple's memorial to dead soldiers in Belle Plaine's Veterans Memorial Park in Minnesota could prompt young people to consider Satanism and reject good moral behavior, a priest has warned. Quote, the inverted pentagrams on the Satanic monument proposed by the Satanic Temple will prompt young people to consider Satanism for themselves and to reject the good moral behavior required for an ordered and peaceful society. Father Brian Lynch of Our Lady of the Prairie in Belle Plaine warned in his address to the City Council on Monday, as reported by the Catholic Spirit. The priest also warned that the monument may also attract pre-existing Satanists to our community as a place for theistic satanic ritual activities that victimize our children. He argued that this could lead to a, quote, form of grooming similar to that used by pedophiles. This grooming is intended to not only make children afraid to report the abuse they will suffer at the hands of Satanists, but also to feel personally responsible for the evil they have suffered as youthful victims, Lynch continued. Most disturbing is the fact that theistic satanic rituals are known to include deviant sexual acts with and among children. So I think you get some sense of insight as to why we get accused of some of the things we get accused of without ever having had any dealings in them at all. It doesn't take much to see this kind of projection coming forward from our opposition. In fact, I did an interview recently where they were asking me if I had any comments upon Christian pedophilia in light of Roy Moore, and I was saying it's not in spite of these teachings, this repressive sexuality, but it's because of it, and we can expect it again and again. Historically, we see it again and again. That kind of repression of your sexuality deforms your sexuality, and it's also enticing to those who have every reason to be ashamed of their predatorial impulses. And it's going to be enticing to them because they're going to think of it as either a cure or a cover. So it really makes me sick when people act surprised when they see that somebody like Roy Moore has some kid's dick in his mouth every so often. We see that from the GOP as well. I'm going to leave you with something that will indicate to you also the cognitive dissonance that we cause amongst some of the religious conservatives who like to view themselves as the upholders of market values and free speech and religious liberty, when it turns out that we can use all those same arguments ourselves, but they never meant them to be used that way. And that was very obvious when I spoke to Tucker Carlson, who believes himself a defender of free speech. I did 2 interviews with him, and this is actually the less contentious of the 2, but I thought it was kind of the more interesting. If you're interested, look up the second one, because he completely melted down during that one. And I think part of what that had to do with is the fact that I forced him to agree with me so much on this one. And in the second one, we were talking about the idea of bakers being able to discriminate against same-sex couples in making cakes. And we had put out a press release where we were saying that if any same-sex couple is turned out for a cake, we will apply to that baker to make them make a cake for the Satanic Temple. And they'll have to because religion is a protected class. And that was what we were trying to put forward, is that we wanted people to consider the fact that religion is a protected class and orientation is not, and why. Why should religion have that type of protection? And then when he had me on that time, I think he thought there was no way he would have to agree with me that a baker should be forced to make a cake for a same-sex couple if they didn't want to. And I don't think he expected me to concede and say, well then fine, but the gay baker shouldn't have to make a cake for the evangelical theocrat. And then his head exploded again because he was supposed to be the defender of everybody's liberty, and then I was sounding like that, and he told me to crawl back into my hole, but thank you very much for coming on. In this case, he was trying to argue against our religious authenticity, and I think that fucking door closed a long time ago, and they never asked anybody litigating Hobby Lobby how literally they believe in the Bible, or which scripture they can point to justify their point of view. And now everybody's getting they're very focused on the nature and degree of our practice and what we really believe and if it's really legitimately a religion. But we have a whole bunch of precedent now in the Supreme Court and earlier on in the lower courts as well, where religious claims are taken at face value. And if these things are to be applied equally, these questions shouldn't be asked of us, but even if they are, I think we're very credible nonetheless. We simply don't subscribe to superstition, but our deeply held beliefs are just as deeply held as anybody else's, and we will fight to our dying breath for that one. But this is how things turned out with Tucker Carlson the first time when I stuck to free speech. Yes.
We'll get there.
Yeah, right after this.
Intermission.
Yeah. Oh, it says I'm still on. It's not exactly how I remember it happening.
Try that arrow down the left corner.
Come on.
It's a little early.
It's wigging out on me. That was a good picture. You got it there. Watch that shit on your own time. It's on YouTube. It's like Lucien Greaves, Tucker Carlson.
Oh, there we go.
They probably got taken down.
Oh, there's others.
Maybe click on the YouTube icon in the corner, and it'll open a different window.
Yeah, maybe.
That might work. We paid the bill this morning.
I thought you had it.
Oh.
Oh.
Thanks a lot. Humanist internet access.
All right, let me try one more thing, and then we'll just go to Q&A.
Your donations to the HSGP will be
James.
Let's get us some fiber optic.
Town, welcome to 2017. What's the point of all this? We'll talk to the co-founder of the Satanic Temple in just a minute. He might explain. Well, a Veterans Park in Belle Plaine City, Minnesota once featured a small Christian monument that was dangerous and offensive, of course. So there were lawsuit threats, and the city declared the monument's location a free speech zone. But that in turn drew the attention of a Satanist group which wanted to erect a satanic shrine in the park. Now the city is reversing itself and has decided to remove all religious symbols from the park instead. Lucien Greaves is the co-founder of the Satanic Temple, and he joins us tonight. Lucien, thanks for joining us. I don't know much about Satanism. What are the 5 pillars of Satanism? What is it?
We have 7 tenets, actually, and actually they're irrelevant to our claim to be allowed in the free speech zone.
Well, the relevance to your claim to be the relevance to your claim to be a religion, and so I just give us a sense of what
actually
it is.
Us being a religion has no bearing on us having
I'm
claim
aware
to
of
free
that,
speech zone either.
but you do claim to be a religion. I just want to know what it is. Is it the worship of Satan?
No, we're actually non-theistic, and modern Satanism has been recognized as non-theistic for some time now. There are actually scholars of modern Satanism. There's books about new religion that cover Satanism, but as I said, it really has no bearing on our claim to access to the free speech.
I guess the reason I'm pressing you on this is because I sort of know a fake media story when I see one, and the whole Satanism thing seems like that. And I'm trying to take you seriously because I take religious people seriously, all of them. But this seems like a way to just kind of give the finger to everyone else. I mean, there are probably not a lot of Satanists in this town of 6,600 in Minnesota, are there?
Well, there are some, and there are veterans. There's a good deal of veterans within our ranks. We have about 100,000 members, many veterans, and there are veterans who don't identify with us who still stood up for our right to speak, and we find that very often when we ask for equal access in the open forum. It's usually veterans who come forward and speak in our defense, and they say these values of free speech and pluralism are the values that they fought for.
Amen, and I agree with that wholeheartedly, hence your appearance tonight. I think people should have a right to speak, but also they should have to answer questions. And the right to speak and the right to sort of give the finger to the residents of this little town in Minnesota, not exactly...
That was not what we were doing. The monument, if you no, of course it is not. So if you look at the monument, it's very respectful, it's reverent, it's a very sober, simple monument, really. And it encourages...
It's a monument to what?
To veterans. This was first and foremost something to honor the veterans who fought and served. All veterans. Not all veterans are Christian, not all veterans are Satanists, but they did fight for pluralism and they did fight for free speech. And to that end, it's nice to know that we can preserve those values. When they shut down the open forum, we weren't actually celebrating that. We built this monument. We were ready to install it. We wanted to put it there. And it seemed like the residents of Belle Plaine weren't entirely up in arms about this. There was some of the word we got back said people thought our monument design wasn't anything to complain about. The protesters from a Catholic organization, they also were out of state. And we get this stuff about a small town and beating up on a small town, but there's no regional boundaries on free speech.
Really, I don't know, try it in downtown Birmingham, Alabama, or Chicago or something. But I mean, look, here's the point I'm making, is that there's no comparison between Satanism, which is like a silly made-up religion which has no God, even non-theistic as you conceded, and Christianity or Judaism or Islam, which you may agree or disagree, believe or not, but they're millennia old, they run hospitals, churches, schools, they form the basis of our civil society. They don't really compare to what you're doing, do they?
Well, we're getting there, where we're a very growing population, and we should defend pluralism and free speech. We can't allow America to divide itself into regional theocracies. Imagine a place like Clearwater, Florida, which is almost entirely colonized by Scientologists. Are they going to shut down the open forum for only veneration of L. Ron Hubbard, or introduce Dianetics as compulsory in their schools? And imagine civil war that would ensue if Muslims
I agree with your point strongly that people ought to be allowed to express divergent views in public. I just don't want to be sucked into the trap of having to take seriously what is clearly not a serious thing. Do you know what I mean? So it's one thing for me to agree with you and say, yeah, we're both for free speech, but this
if we weren't being serious, I would understand what you're saying. I think if you learn anything about the Satanic Temple, you'll see that we must be serious. We can't have these types of numbers. We have chapters internationally We're
I
quickly
believe your
growing.
numbers for a second, and I mean, I don't what does that even? So like on
You don't have to.
Well, I don't believe the numbers of any group that comes up. So I always divide by 10, and that's probably an overstatement for any group, but especially yours. But before we go,
So what if it were two?
The principle would be
we'd
this.
still
The
have
principle,
equal access to
yes,
the
you
open
would.
forum.
You would have the right to say what you think if it was just you, and I would be willing to defend that right. But again, the point of calling this Satanism is to horrify, like, normal people in the middle of the country. That is exactly the point.
That's not true. No, that is not exactly.
So what is the point? Just
And I
sum
will
it up for
argue
me.
that point.
I'll give you 30 seconds. What's the point of Satanism?
Well, to sum up a religious movement in its history in 30 seconds isn't quite fair, but I would say that. But I would say that Satanism embodies Enlightenment values. It is emblematic of the ultimate rebellion against tyranny. To that end, we look at the history of the crushing of the church and the rise of Enlightenment values and the rise of pluralism and diversity and multiculturalism as inherently satanic.
Yeah, I think what you're doing is you're taking a Christian symbol, Satan, and using it against Christians. I mean, that's kind of the point, because you could have chosen sort of anything to name this group since it's basically new, and you didn't. You chose the one thing that Christians hate the most. So again, it's
because
by its
Satanism
nature.
means something to us. It's not an arbitrary label.
Right. I wish you were more
think you could
straightforward
really
with
get into it.
Listen, thanks for joining us. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Did you sign up?
Yeah, we were expecting to see him in Bisbee, but it didn't happen. But in any case, we've done quite a bit, and I've only covered some of the campaigns, so with the time we have, I'll open it up to questions now, but make them good.
Any questions?
By the way, appreciate what you're doing. Regarding the Ten Commandments, the 10th Commandment equates the status of women with a man's house, his servants, his oxen, and his donkey, and everything else he owns. I would love to see an uprising of women in some community that wants to put the Ten Commandments on the courthouse. We're not going to tolerate anything that says men can own women.
Well, it starts, yeah, I agree, but it starts even before that. In Oklahoma even, there was a group of pastors and other religious identifiers with some kind of sect of Christianity, different Baptists or whomever, and they were against the Ten Commandments monument going up in Oklahoma because they did have a certain respect for the value of the separation of church and state in a way that I wish more people who identified with the Christian religion in whatever form would also respect, and that they would also learn to see that when an idiot senator is trying to gain political credibility or pander to their platform by fighting for a Ten Commandments monument to go up on public grounds, even knowing full well it won't stand, and that's what we're seeing in Arkansas right now. There's, I would say, the law is never entirely clear, but it's almost 100% that this monument won't stand. None of the conditions met by any of the monuments, Ten Commandments monuments that did stand, apply to the Ten Commandments monument in Arkansas. But the pastors in Oklahoma were concerned at this idea that the Ten Commandments monument were being presented as not a religious document, but as a secular one that spoke to the codification of law, because they did see it it was a sacred document to them. And for the government to take ownership of this sacred document and declare it secular, they felt had a very negative impact on their own understanding of their religious point of view. And they didn't feel a need to advertise their religion on public grounds, and nor should they. I think they had a deeper understanding of the issue, even though we might disagree with them religiously on just about everything else. And I like talking to those kinds of people, and I like building those bridges where we can with very specific limited things, but reserving the right to offend them on everything else. But you're right, once you start dissecting the Ten Commandments, what they say and what they stand for, they don't align with most any of our values, and that's why every time you argue the Ten Commandments, they're only going to focus on two. Thou shalt not kill and thou shalt not steal, while ignoring the rest, and acting like any claim against a Ten Commandments monument is a revolt against prohibitions on murder or theft.
I am kind of unique amongst the membership here at HSGP. I actually was a Satanist. I was a member of the Church of Satan. I still have my little red card. I left that group because I kind of started to get pushed back against my political views and wanting to be involved in things like helping the homeless and so forth. Given that background, there's one question I've always wanted people to ask you, but as far as I know, no one's asked you. What are your feelings on Peter Gilmore, and do you think he's a bit of a hypocrite because at the height of the Satanic Panic, he went on many shows, Sally Jesse Raphael, Bob Larson's program a number of times, and as far as I know, he didn't really convince anyone with those appearances like you did with Tucker Carlson. He didn't get anyone to see his side of things.
Unfortunately, people ask me about the Church of Satan all the time, and I don't think very hard about them. They're a website, and they sell membership cards for $225. They don't get involved in anything. They don't do anything but complain about what the Satanic Temple is doing and calling it unsatanic. So comparing us to an inactive organization, it isn't really fair to us, I don't think. And I don't really scrutinize what they're doing. Because that's confined to their Twitter feed, and I'm not particularly interested in reading pop culture commentary with cute little OMGs behind them and silly emoticons. So that's about all they mean to me. Thank you.
Yes, the name is Calpon Piso. I was wondering, why don't we start from the beginning on different things? For instance, what do we use to create thinking? See, and a lot of people, Ten Commandments, Bibles, many Bibles. There are as many gods as the brain can create. We are simply evolved, mutated primates, created by a speed of semen, DNA, from a penis. So who's our creator? So it's amazing. It's amazing that they don't see religion, beliefs, as a mental illness. It's schizophrenia. It's that one with schizophrenia. Why don't you mention that to these people that create all these imaginary friends in the United States of America, which is a Christianity-infected nation?
Well, you can look at the evolution of biological systems to debunk a good deal of the Bible, or at least relegate it to some kind of metaphor, and the metaphor certainly relates to the feeling of Jewish tribes related to the occupation they suffered during the Babylonian times, and thereafter the New Testament goes on to different kind of wartime propaganda for the most part. But you can then look at the different books of the Bible and look at the evolution of that literary history. There's a pretty good book that came out recently, or at least it was translated recently from the German, I believe it was, called The Invention of God. And it's very easy, because it's more modern, to look at the literary evolution of Satan starting from Milton and seeing why that is a very important metaphor to us. You see that literary evolution, and Satan becomes this heroic figure against this Jehovan oppression that crushes the world, whether you believe in that literally or not. But you have people going back further now, religious scholars, who see the evolution of God, and they see indications of polytheism throughout the Old Testament, and acknowledgement of other gods before this story was cohered and they built the Yahweh Jehovah that we know today. So you can look at literary evolution and biological evolution And all of it points to the untenability of a theistic viewpoint. And I don't think that takes anything away, though, from our practice and our acknowledgement that our beliefs are metaphorical. I think when people feel that that diminishes us as a religion somehow, they're certainly conceding far too much to supernaturalism and taking too much away from the power of art. I think that may have answered your question. But if it didn't,
actually,
it was okay anyway.
Creator of thinking, nobody mentions the brain. Religion and
we got to move on to the next question.
Yeah, religion is one of the schizophrenia.
Hi, I'm in the back here. So it's been said that getting atheists to agree on anything is like herding cats, let alone mobilize. So my question to you is very open-ended: is what can we do to get secularists, atheists, that sort, to mobilize and adhere and act together on especially social issues to make a change as a force, much in the same way that we see the religious people mobilize en masse.
Stop worrying about narrowing down on what everybody else is thinking. To me, atheism is just one thing. It's a non-belief in a deity. And anytime somebody says, as an atheist, I believe, that's where they should stop. It doesn't go any further than that. And Satanism describes what we do believe. It doesn't describe what we don't believe. And partially, that we're non-theistic, so we're open about not subscribing to supernaturalism. But I think as atheists, you have to accept your conservative factions and just take it as a good thing that you can at least have those discussions based in some realm of empiricism rather than religious dogma. I think if more people were claiming to be non-theistic Christians, we'd probably be better off because they would have less grounds to appeal to superstition, and they could only then claim deeply held belief and conscientious objection, and then they would have to acknowledge that that's individual. That's not something they can impose upon the rest of the world. They'd have to recognize that different people can believe different things about different symbolic structures, and I think that's something the Satanic Temple forces people to think about. We talk about these values that they feel that they've upholded a lot of times. When I talk to a guy like Dr. Carlson, he's not very pleased to hear me taking the high ground of free speech. But I feel genuinely that we have it. Every step of progress we've made during the rights revolutions has been satanized by the Theocrats in one way or another. And now they're trying to claim the Founding Fathers as their own, where at the time from the pulpit they were being denounced as atheists. And I really think you have to just keep in mind the limited objectives of whatever project you're working on at the time and work with the allies who are going to work with you on that and not worry so much about narrowing the definition of atheism. I think that's where the atheist movement is losing a lot of people. So there you go.
Hi, perhaps I'll be a little bit of a black sheep and say that I am an active and believing Mormon, okay? But I do defend and believe and support in your right to free speech and worship, to pray, in public and build statues and just everything you talked about here tonight. I'm an interfaith advocate in that sense, and I would just as much want to see your rights defended as a minority as I would mine in other circumstances. So I have a question though. I'm curious as to, perhaps your own upbringing, if you feel comfortable sharing that. Perhaps were you raised in any particular religious upbringing, or kind of how did you come to be involved in Satanism?
No, I was raised in a blackened, windowless basement where I was beaten regularly to cut raw meat. And they would play Led Zeppelin records backward. And then I came out as this. And I've just started tanning from that. My dad had a Catholic background, my mom had a Protestant background, and sometimes I was taken to either one of the churches at different points, and didn't really take to them from the start. But what was more, they weren't terribly religious though. They didn't. Sometimes they would try to go through little stints where they'd take me to Sunday school or whatever, and I hated it every time. But what had more of a profound effect on me was what the sociologists would call the satanic panic. And when I was a kid, there was these tales going around that there were satanic cults murdering babies and using mobile crematoriums to clean up the evidence. And in fact, the less evidence there was of this kind of occult mafia, the bigger the conspiracy grew. The idea was that law enforcement was in on it. And this was a very tinfoil hat conspiracy theory that gained mainstream acceptance for a while and was talked about on the daytime talk shows from Sally Jesse Raphael to Geraldo Rivera. Ran this famous special on Halloween in like 1986, I think it was, that was talking about the dangers of heavy metal music, Dungeons and Dragons, and talked to real victims of satanic ritual abuse who turned out, for the most part, to have undergone regressive therapy under hypnosis where they recovered memories that they had been abused by satanic cults. And this was the same phenomenon that triggered the alien abduction scene, where people felt that they had recovered memories of being abducted by aliens, anal probed, and taken aboard spacecraft and all these other things. If you're interested in that topic, we have a subsection of the Satanic Temple called Grey Faction. We have a website called greyfaction.org. And what we've noticed, and something that I've been fighting against for years prior to founding the Satanic Temple, was that a lot of the old players during the Satanic Panic in the mental health field are still in play, and they're still doing the same things. They're still using regressive therapy to convince people that they suffered a type of abuse that they never had, which is very destructive to the life of the client and has ramifications for the rest of society as false accusations still go around. So we've initiated petitions against certain conspiracist practitioners within the mental health field, and this is something we want to fight very, very aggressively in the future. And we're very open about the fact that we want to ruin the careers of these fuckers in the mental health field who still put forward these ideas. There again, I went off and think I answered his question, but I did not. I'll pretend I did.
Hi, big fan. And if someone from the local chapter could hook me up after, I'd like to know how to volunteer or whatever. And forgive me if this is half-formed, but the gentleman was talking about the part of the Ten Commandments where women are property, and I started thinking about another part of the Ten Commandments that may actually agree somewhat with the satanic tenets. Mainly honor thy father and mother, and the idea that the body, a person has control over their own body. If my father and mother did not want me to be born, should I honor that if it's my mother's body? Does that make sense?
Well,
to honor my father and mother if they asked me to not come into this world because it is her body and that is her choice. So in that way, the Ten Commandments agree with the satanic tenets in a way.
Well, I mean, you were born, and you were born after a point where you could have had some kind of cognition. I think on balance, I mean, I don't want to get into a deep philosophical debate on abortion and what could be, on what's a prospective person and what is not. But I have no real animosity towards my parents. I'm fine with them. But I don't necessarily agree with the dictate that we must honor our father and mother if they haven't accepted our own bodily autonomy. For instance, when we're fighting in Texas now against corporal punishment in schools. And in the public schools, they allow school administrators to beat children. And if you set your Google alerts to follow corporal punishment in schools, you'll find that sometimes it's really egregious. They beat kids in ways that if their parents did it, their parents would be charged with a felony. But they say it's okay a lot of times because in the school districts now where they allow them to beat the kids punitively, and I don't want to get into this argument with people either where they say that, well, have you ever dealt with a child that's violently attacking another child? That's not what we're talking about when we talk about corporal punishment. When we talk about corporal punishment, they are allowing beatings as a punitive measure. They are allowing the infliction of pain as a corrective measure against children. Say they're tardy for class or whatever, they could be subject to a beating. And they'll say that parents have to opt into this, and that's what we're dealing with where we have a billboard citing our exemption because we offer an exemption to the children. people advised us against that. They said, you want to offer the exemption to the parents because people won't take very well to you propagandizing towards children, that they can sign an exemption on their behalf to be presented to the school district, that because their values align with the Satanic Temple, that they exempt themselves from punitive beatings in schools. But we feel that if a kid is in an abusive environment and their parents are okay with beating them, and then they extend that to the school district, well, fuck them. You know, fuck the parents. The kids have the right to say no to that. And so I think that's where I stand on the honor that my mother and father dictate.
All right, well, we have exhausted all of our time tonight, and we have a tradition here at HSGP to thank our speakers for spending time with us and presenting to our group, and it's a tradition of mugging the speaker. So here's your gift mug.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks for the gift
Thank you, Andre. I think this is an apt slide to end on. What'd you think of that? Was that great or what? Let's give another round of applause. So the gentleman in the back asked, and I was like, over here, over here. Okay, so we are the Human Society of Greater Phoenix, and that is what we do. We are building that community of non-believers, atheists, agnostics, and people who are just curious about learning more about the world and who they are. That's us. We're building that here. You can also consult the Secular Coalition for Arizona. They're also we have secular lobbyists in the State House right now. Well, not right now, they're closed. But you saw Tori, you saw Zenito, you saw Diane Post. These are all core people in our community that are fighting for everybody's rights in this room. And we invite you to come back and listen to more cool speakers. And we have game nights, children's programs. We've got Philosophy and the Influence that's coming up next Sunday. It's an amazing event. We crochet mats for the homeless, so we're involved in the community. So if you're looking for that, come talk to us. We're going to jump to dinner. I don't know if we're going to take a whole bunch of people, but we'll probably take a few to...
liquid dinner.
Yeah, liquid dinner, I suppose. If you want to join us over at the Brass and Tap over at the Riverview, we'll be headed over there next. And if there's nothing else, I guess we'll see everybody next time. Have a great evening. Thanks for coming.